Hello and welcome to the State of Soy. I'm Aaron Putsey. Water and soil, both are essential for growing soybeans. But more than that, they're essential for sustaining life. It's little wonder, therefore, that so many care about sustaining and improving the health of these two natural resources, farmers and landowners included. While there's universal agreement as to the importance of making water cleaner and soil stronger, opinions diverge on how to do it. And as with almost every environmental issue, farmers and landowners are critical stakeholders in the discussion and the results. On this edition of the State of Soy, we dive into the issue of water and soil quality, the status of both, practices that work and those that show promise, and where we go from here on an issue of such importance to our state and country, both rural and urban. Joining me for today's conversation are Roger Wolf, Director of Environmental Programs and Services for the Iowa Soybean Association, and Dave Muth with Peoples Company. Roger, let's get right to it. Give us the status of water quality in Iowa right now.
It's my pleasure to be here, Aaron. Thank you. When you think of the status, you really need to think about the time frame. So how are we describing it? So I like to think in big blocks of time. There's no doubt that we have made some progress in improving water quality in the state, but yet there are some significant challenges that remain. At Iowa Soybean Association, we actually have an accredited water quality lab, and so we like to take the data and follow the data in terms of the condition of the water. And we know that there are certain places in the state where we have water quality challenges, nutrient issues, and where we have those places, we're working to address those issues with programs. And we also know that our soils have a big role to play in water quality, and we know that the state is variable. And so we also are working to improve soil quality in those places as well. So bringing those things together is a big part of the solution. But, you know, the water, we still have some significant challenges. If I had to give it a letter grade, which is a risky thing, you know, it might be, in some places it might be a C minus, other places it might be a B, and in some places it might be a D.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of variability. I know, Dave, in your work, you work with landowners and with farmers, so I'm going to take a little bit of a different twist on the question. How would you rate the status of farmer and landowner engagement on the issue of water and soil health?
Yeah, it very much is a mixed bag. So I think that we've seen some of the technical parameters around improving and maintaining soil, some real progress. Erosion has gotten a lot of attention over the past decades. We're seeing a lot of practices in place. There's a lot of awareness. We're seeing a real resurgence of the soil health conversation as it plays into the whole picture. There's still some issues around resilience, right? And think about water infiltration, particularly as we've had some more wet years. And what we're seeing is that there's really good engagement from the perspective of how it impacts baseline economics. How are our farms and our land assets performing? And then how can we improve that performance? Those are the places where we can really see that engagement start to take place.
So as we focus on just kind of getting the lay of the land in terms of the quality of our soil and water, as well as the quality of the conversation going on between the farmer and the landowner, what's a misperception? I'll come back to you, Roger. What's a misperception out there that maybe is being perpetuated either through headlines or just kind of through rote, rehearsed reactions or responses or conversations that isn't true?
Well, I think, you know, what we have today is unprecedented alignment, at least in terms of addressing the issue. I think the misperception is that the belief that farmers don't care, or that it's just big ag and it's just the cost of doing business. As Dave said, the realities on this, you know, we have no choice but to farm in the face of the weather that's given to us, and we go from very cold to very hot to very dry to very wet, and farmers farm in that space. And as Dave mentioned, resiliency, you know, farmers have no choice but to adapt in that space. So as we're making progress over time, you look back to the 80s and 90s, we made tremendous progress in no-till being adopted, and I think it's just a continuation. But this idea that agriculture doesn't care or farmers don't care is a misperception.
It's a great point. And what's the criticism that maybe you hear, Dave, that doesn't square with the reality as you see it in working out there on the land?
Yeah, there's a lot of segments of landowners and a lot of segments of farmers in terms of awareness and willingness to attack these various different issues. And you can find great case studies that fall into all of these different segments. When you look at it from a landowner perspective, one of the things that we really emphasize is the fact that long-term value and appreciation is the biggest component of return for a landowner over a long time. Whether you're talking about the family sort of operation that's going to be multi-generational, or you're talking about an investor coming in. And these issues are at the core of that long-term appreciation. And sometimes that gets a little bit sidelined with that focus on pouring resources in for a quick turn. We do have complicating factors with annual leases, as an example, where farmers have to be able to meet the bottom line on a year-by-year basis. And so there's some connections that still need to be made, but there is a large amount of awareness, and we're working pretty hard on trying to continue to grow that understanding.
So Dave, a big piece of this equation about showing progress on water quality and soil quality in Iowa really hinges on the farmer-landowner relationship. So what are you seeing that is working, and how are you at Peoples encouraging more cooperation between the two?
Yeah, you absolutely have to have alignment. So one of the key pieces is just being incredibly transparent. What are the landowner goals? And when we're representing a landowner, that means sitting down and having the conversation. What's important to you? How do we see your long-term asset value and the growth of that value really being materialized in the management plan? We put that into a conservation amendment within a lease structure, and then we have to have a farmer that has the same vision that fits with that lease and with that landowner set of goals. And when you can create that alignment, then you can find value, and it really does have to hinge around value for both parties as well as just those personal interests.
Are you seeing these conversations happening a bit easier and more frequently?
I would say yes. Certainly that's a bit of a generalization. It's not there in all cases, and you find a lot of different kinds of landowners and their level of engagement in some of these kinds of conversations. But as a general theme, certainly the popularity of the topic has grown.
So Roger, for the farmers watching this, what practices should they be aware of that are really showing that kind of promise and results that are also workable for, dare I say, the average farmer in Iowa?
I think simply today, if we're going to address water quality, the table stakes to think about really are in-field practices. We need to have less tillage. Tillage and soil disturbance is probably the biggest factor on the health of our soil to begin with. And then nutrient management. I mean, you got to have good soil management, and then you have to have good nutrient management. And fortunately, we have great tools today. Our ag retailers are equipped for this. Precision agriculture is becoming a bigger deal, and it makes economic sense for the farmers, and goes back to what Dave was saying about a value proposition. And if the landowners are buying into that vision, and you have operators buying into that vision, and you're making money, and there has to be money on both sides of the equation. So fundamental infield reduced tillage is key, and fortunately we're seeing a good upswing in no-till and strip-till. You bring in cover crops would be then the third tier, because you're adding carbon to that soil. And then finally, we would look at edge of field practices where we can trap and treat some of the nutrients that might be lost from the farm field.
Well, we're here at the shed, and of course, when you're talking table stakes, it fits. And we talk about icing on the cake. What would be for the farmer who is down the road a bit on some of these practices, what else could they be looking at doing to maybe take that next step?
Well, I think there's multiple levels. You can be more advanced, and at Iowa Soybean Association, we do a lot of on-farm research, and so where you can compare and contrast a conventional practice against an alternative, you look at that data and you see how it responds. You also, with precision agriculture, remote sensing, and yield monitoring combines, you can begin to understand how these practices start impacting the bottom line, and that's a big deal. So the more advanced you are, the more data and information you bring into the equation, the better decision making that can occur.
And Dave, from people's standpoint, what are you seeing in terms of the practices that are really taking off? It could be maybe the landowner is maybe a bit predisposed to a certain practice, or maybe it's the farmer, and maybe they gel around the same practices, but which are you seeing that are showing the greatest promise and the greatest progress right now?
Yeah, so certainly the tillage practices that Roger mentioned are a pretty big deal. And when you're starting to talk about land that falls into that more highly erodible category, that's where you really see a lot of movement. And there's a lot of landowners that own that land that are in our portfolio. We have a cover crop program that we've put in place with Stein Seed that is gaining some traction, and certainly that fits within the whole matrix of different cover crop support opportunities that are out there. That is certainly a step that we're seeing quite a bit of progress on. And then what's really interesting is the precision management elements. So being very precise about nutrient management, being very precise about integrated pest management, those sorts of elements are becoming more and more available and implementable within the system.
So within Peoples, for farmers interested in learning more about the cover crop program that you mentioned with Stein, where can they go for more information?
Sure, it's available, information's available right on the website, peoplescompany.com.
And Roger, for those who want to drill in a bit deeper on some of these practices, where would you recommend they go?
Well, Aaron, I'm going to promote our website at Iowa Soybean Association. And there's a lot of information on there, and you can take a deep dive into research results, and you can hear from other farmers and how it's worked for them, and usually that's the best source of information.
And also, if they're interested in cost share opportunities and the financial side, because we know that can be a hurdle, but that can also be an opportunity.
Yeah, today there's more financial assistance available all over the place, whether it's the federal NRCS, the state Department of Agriculture. Usually the soil and water conservation districts are a good conduit to gain access to that. And then where we have organized watershed projects where we're focusing in, there's extra resources available for those farmers. And so that, and at Iowa Soybean Association, we tend to be a matchmaker and a facilitator to help people get aligned with cost share opportunities and assistance.
Now let's go to a question from a viewer and also a past Iowa Soybean Association director.
Hi, I'm Mark Jackson. I farm southeast Iowa, about an hour southeast of Des Moines. How do you view the one water conversation moving forward in the world of conservation and agriculture in general?
So, Roger, the one water topic, how would you frame that?
You know, I'm a tremendous advocate for one water, and for folks that don't know what that is, it's really this integrated, holistic water management. And so today, we're dealing with floods, we're dealing with downstream nutrient issues, we're dealing with upstream water quality issues. And so one water brings it all together under one umbrella. As I think about the future and where we're going, today we have urban interests working with upstream agriculture interests, and we're making great progress on those topics. And the reason we're making progress is because we're understanding what values the urban folks need, and we're thinking about what kinds of services the upstream agriculture interests can provide. And we're trying to cut a deal. We're making projects where there's a value proposition for both parties. And that's why I'm optimistic about one water. And frankly, I don't see how you can do it any other way. The non-point source challenge, the water quality challenges facing this country are enormous, and there's a lot of variability. And we can't do this in a siloed sort of way. And so One Water brings those pieces together, brings the alignment together, and we really start thinking about the value proposition.
So you're addressing the rural, urban stakeholders, and again, Dave, it's about that farmer and landowner stakeholder, which is also very important. What gives you a lot of reason for optimism as you look forward with those relationships?
Yeah, so we remain very focused on this value equation, right? And there is a lot of opportunities for us to make progress within a very sort of standard traditional look at that value equation. We can continue to find the right outcomes from business planning and implementation of practices where you get a value equation that's aligned. When you start talking about some of the more complicated issues that One Water is working on addressing and some of the other programs and dialogues that are going on, we're continuing to try and stay as engaged as possible so that we can bring those back to our clients working as landowners and then ultimately their farmer tenants in order to find the opportunities to get things implemented, again, fixed around that value equation, because that's where you have real sustainability.
There are some who say that progress isn't happening fast enough. How do you respond to that?
Well, progress happens at the rate of investment. And if we have more resources, we can speed it up. But we also have the ingredients of relationships. You have to have working relationships. And where we have those, we see great progress. And there's no doubt about it. There's no argument about that. I'd love it to go faster. I'd love it for there to be more resources so it can go faster, because we have a big job to do if we're serious about the goals that we all have on these issues. So therein lies some of the challenge.
From your vantage point, Dave, again, in thinking about the space that Peoples has in this equation, as you look maybe 1 to 3 years down the road, what gives you the most reason for optimism on continuing to show progress on such an important issue?
Yeah, so it comes back to the alignment piece. We're continuing to see more and more progress in alignment of interests and finding the ways to get those interests aligned in very implementable kinds of outcomes. One of the challenges certainly that we face, this is a water quality component more, is the fact that there's a lot of good work going on, but it tends to be fairly dispersed, right? And those kinds of practice implementations and don't generate as good or as immediate of outcomes when you see dispersed resources, particularly related to the water quality. On some of the soil progress, that can be visualized and measured at a smaller scale, and we're able to see that just a little bit more quickly. So as we continue to draw more and more alignment across the interest, that's what really keeps us optimistic.
If you could wave your magic wand, Roger, how would you wave it? What would appear that would be significant and meaningful to move forward on such a big and such an important issue?
Well, Aaron, on the waterfront, I'm a watershed guy. I believe in the watershed approach because you're putting boundaries around an area, and watersheds are nested. And so we know that we can make progress in very small watersheds, and we need to scale those up. So if I could wave my magic wand and we had unlimited resources, we would have a significant watershed approach in the United States and within the states. And because what that does is you have plans, you have institutional alignment, you have data and information driving decision making, and you have financing to drive this. So you talk about sustainability, you have to have all those ingredients for it to work.
And I'll kind of pose the same question to you to wrap, Dave. If you could have that one thing or that one change agent, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And the reality within our business is being able to make sure that landowners understand the long-term value proposition in a very clear and transparent way. Once we are able to establish that, being able to move it back to practices and the relationship with farmer tenants becomes a much, much simpler process. And then we can, again, data-driven, sort of execution-driven monitoring of how that progress moves forward. And so that would be really the ideal circumstances to make that sort of a universal language.
And thus concludes our first season of The State of Soy. We trust you've benefited from our conversations spanning a host of issues, from trade, tariffs, and livestock to gold midge, water quality, and food labels. You've heard from us and nearly a dozen guests. Now we'd like to hear from you. Send us a note. Tell us what you liked, how we can improve, and most importantly, the topics and the guests that you'd like to hear from in Season 2. Thanks to the Machine Shed Restaurant in Urbandale for hosting this timely and informative conversation. And be sure to connect with the Iowa Soybean Association. Until our next episode, the very best to you from the Iowa Soybean Association. Now go make it a great day and have a safe and bountiful harvest.